What's up, Solomon? How you doing?
Hey Joe, glad to be here.
Thank you. Good to have you here. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think we have any agenda. It's usually par for the course of these these shows. Yeah, maybe a quick intro for the audience for people who don't know who you are. What's your story?
Sure. Um, I'll give you the full background. Again, Joe, thank you very much for the invite.
Anytime.
I'm Solomon Kahn. I'm the CEO of Delivery Layer, which is a data startup. I've
Nice.
been a data person for a long time, before sort of we were even sort of known in the same way as data people. So
Hmm.
I studied statistics in college, operations research, and
Nice.
then never thought I was going to use it again. I went into finance for a couple of years as sort of a financial analyst at this sort of entrepreneurial financial holding company where I was the analyst for the management team.
Interesting.
Nowadays, I would consider what I did to be a lot of data work, but back then I just considered it to be working in finance.
Yeah.
And and then I transitioned into tech. I was really interested in building things, and I thought that most of the cool stuff in my lifetime that was going to get built was going to be technology products as opposed to like the next hedge fund or mutual fund. And I ended up starting a company which crashed and burned, and then I was got a job at a startup right when data science started to become a thing. And it was this article came out, and it was, they said if only you could find someone who knew statistics and business and programming all in one, they could do
Okay.
this really cool thing called data science. And that's exactly what I did. So I raised my hand. I said, "Hey, let me do this thing," and started leading the team there and built out a team, and the rest is history. So I've been leading data teams for over a decade and data businesses. I was at startup for a while. I've been at a consulting company helping large companies build new data products. I ran a data business, ran product and analytics, owned the P&L of Nielsen Sports, which is
Hmm.
a division in Nielsen that focuses on sports sponsorships. I ran data at a unicorn startup company called Helium 10, and then most recently have started Delivery Layer.
Cool. Congrats. So it's quite the trajectory too. So I want to unpack something you said earlier when you got into data. It wasn't really called data back then. It was just maybe doing your job that you're hired to do. So around what time period was that?
So that was 2007, 2006, 2007.
Okay.
And it, you know, finance as a field has a lot of data that goes into various decisions that are made, whether it's investing decisions or whether it's risk calculations, or credit calculations. And there, because in finance, there's some very real benefits and costs when you either get an analysis right or wrong.
Oh yeah.
And as a result, I think the financial field has always been pretty data driven.
Oh yeah.
And so starting a career there, again, for me, when I was working in finance, a model meant an Excel model, not a machine
Hmm.
learning model.
Right.
But if you actually think about the kinds of decisions that are made off of Excel models, I would argue that they may be more impactful than machine learning models in terms of like decisions that get made in the real world. So it was a really interesting way to start a career.
Hmm. Yeah, I bet you learned a lot. Yeah, it's interesting too. The operations research studies too. I'm sure maybe help there. That's a lot of like linear programming and stuff that lends itself really well to spreadsheets. So
Yeah.
that's super cool. Yeah, operations research is one of those areas too. Like I wish that was getting a lot more attention than it does. I feel like that's there's so much you can do with that. So
Yeah, there is. I understand why it doesn't. I haven't really used a lot
mhm.
of the like operations research type of, like, not that many programs fall into the types of optimizations that you would need operations research for in most companies. Not that it doesn't happen, or especially if you have factories or you have
Yeah.
other manufacturing, obviously you need a lot of operations research there.
Mhm.
But the typical strategic type of decisions, I haven't found myself reaching towards like integer programming very much, right?
Right, right.
It's
But stuff like simplex, for example, right? Like that lends itself really well to, I think we were using that kind of stuff a lot. And I was working more in supply chains and operations just because why not? So
yes.
yeah. Whereas I think in modern data scientists, and the reason I bring this up is I think it's one of these things where in data science it's overlooked, right? And how it's taught. Like you jump straight into machine learning and um, barely any stats from what I noticed. It's just like jump in and say, okay, so just here's pandas and here's how you can do a random forest and stuff. But then what I see as data scientists, maybe they go work in an area like operations or supply chain, for example, where operations research is very heavily used. And they're like, oh, what if we just throw machine learning at this problem? I'm like, yeah, but there's also techniques that have been around for decades that have really proven themselves to work. So learn things that work. So I don't know. I'm maybe going off on a bit of a tangent, but I was thinking a lot about it today. Sort of the I guess a lot of traditional techniques that somehow get overlooked these days. When we teach. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's a really important point in there, which is there was a time when data work, what like the brand of data work was just generally people being scrappy and finding technical solutions to business problems, and data science was this very broad umbrella that would encompass a lot of the stuff, for example, that you would see in operations research, where you if you were in that domain and doing supply chain analysis or working in a factory or whatever, like that would still be under the umbrella.
Yeah.
I think that when a lot of programs came out with curriculums around specifically what it meant to be a data scientist versus
Mm-hmm.
not, I think that certain people started to get very narrow views of what would be considered a data
Mm-hmm.
scientist. And I agree with you. There's a lot that's not in there that probably should be.
They would just make life a lot easier rather than trying to throw machine learning at every single problem, right? It's like these techniques have been around for a while, and yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. Not, I can get on my soapbox and rant about this, and maybe I'll make a LinkedIn post sometime about this. But anyway, yeah, it's just interesting. So I don't know. But enough about that. But you're doing a startup these days, right? And I guess jumping from leading teams, being an IC to running a startup. I mean, I can't imagine there's um, uh, I don't know. I've done that before too. So what's been your impression so far?
Yeah, so I had started one before,
Okay.
and so for me, I think well, okay, in my last startup, I had this, and this was, you know 12 years ago, 13 years ago, and I had this idea that, oh, I had to go start a company, and that was like really important for me, for my life, and it was sort of a part of defining who I was, that
Interesting.
I was going to go and start my own thing. And I actually think that a lot of the messaging in the world right now around entrepreneurship, like I fell into it very hard 13 or 14 years ago, and it was not good for me, because I just sort of jumped in, and I really, whatever, you learn a lot of things, but I just sort of, I was going to do something, and then I tried to find an idea, and I just sort of landed on something and ran with it. But over the years, having been in companies leading data teams, I've actually found a lot of enjoyment of like leading teams and managing people and building capabilities within organizations. And there are a lot of benefits to doing that, especially for data people, to be inside a big company. Because the reality is, as a startup founder, yes, I'm sort of in the data space, so I'm more of a data person, but startup being a startup founder is not like a data job. And I was very good at being a data leader. And the only places that there are opportunities to be a data leader are at bigger companies. That's just like, startups are never going to have a big data team. So I think that sort of popular culture doesn't do a good enough job at giving like a path for people to feel like good and happy about working in a company, being a data person, I actually think it was great. And I did it very happily for over a decade. And it was enjoyable, it was rewarding, personally, financially, the whole thing. The reason that I started Delivery Layer was I had this idea that I kind of just couldn't get out of my head for a
Hmm.
long time. And the startup that I was at did a restructuring where I was sort of in a position that, like, I politically just didn't want to be in. And so I
Mm.
decided, okay, do I want to go and find another opportunity, or do I want to go and start this? And in this case, I had this idea for so long that I just decided to go start it. But I don't think it's an absolute good that everybody should just go and start a company. I don't think it certainly wouldn't have been good for my life when my kids were younger, or when, like, I wasn't as stable. And so I don't think it's good that the message out there is entrepreneurship is always the thing. Not I'm doing it, so I'm not against it, but
Well, yeah, we both done it, right? Like on more than once, right? And so it is interesting. I would say from the 2010s, especially the early 2010s, late 2000s, to today, there is a lot of emphasis on, starting a company, be your own boss, hustle culture, all that kind of stuff. And I totally agree. Most people shouldn't run companies. Most people shouldn't. Most people shouldn't manage anything. They should just do what they're good at. As a IC, I also think, but on the entrepreneurship route, it's just one of these things where uh, there's a lot of roadkill that I see all the time. People taking a giant gamble on this, path to riches, or success, or whatever you want to call it, whatever whatever motivates you to start a business. I don't know. I mean, I start a business, and I do my own thing right now because I'm happy doing it. Right. It's just kind of what I like to do. I don't like having to report to bosses and all that kind of stuff. I like having my own schedule and having freedom of my time. That's why the freedom of the time is why I do what I do. It's just like I can't do these kind of things, you know. But that's not the typical reason most people, I think, are encouraged to do entrepreneurship, right? It is interesting, and it takes a huge financial toll on people. Like I see people who, um, go out and start businesses and utterly fail, right? And that's par for the course, right? But this puts them in a position where now you're sometimes 10 years behind, and it takes a long time to get back. So you got a lot of lessons, but and that's part of the tuition. You're going to fail a lot, but you got to be able to recover and live to fight another day too. So,
yeah, one of my favorite sayings is that you never get rid of your problems, you only change them for new problems.
mm,
And so I I'm really enjoying my time starting Delivery Layer, and
yeah,
I don't want to not encourage entrepreneurship. If that's a choice that you want to make for your life, it's going to come with pluses and it's going to come with minuses. And like you said, the hustle culture, a lot of the common stuff out there. I have been a very happy corporate employee
yeah,
for the last 10 plus years before I started Delivery Layer. And I have tried to build teams where the people that work for me were also very happy, fulfilled corporate data people. And I think that as a data, if you want to be a successful data person, the best place to do that is at a company. And that doesn't make you any less than someone who goes and starts their own thing.
right.
So
Totally agree.
that's just the message that I would want to push back on the other side. But I am excited about Delivery Layer. I don't want to.
Well, it's a path you chose for yourself, and it is what it is. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right too. I mean, the big companies, they have something that a small company doesn't, which is data. That's just that's seems obvious enough, but yeah, you need data upon which to do data stuff. So, but I think that's a good point, though. I hadn't really thought of it that way before. I think that definitely goes unrecognized because, again, I see entrepreneurs starting, quote, data companies, and it's a very hard cold start problem, right? Like we, at Turner, we worked with a lot of companies, and some of them were, hoping to become data brokers and so forth. But that is a gnarly problem to start from zero on. So unless you had some insight advantage of getting data sets and working with them, but you're absolutely right. If you want to do data stuff, big companies they already have it. Then you can go do your data stuff and not worry about running a company, um, all the fun that goes with that. So that's pretty cool, though. I guess what do you miss though? Do you miss running a data teams, or are you
Yeah,
pretty
I
much
do.
okay?
I really, I'm on like random Slack groups and I'm on like locally optimistic, or I'll like do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn to scratch some of the itch that I miss from leading a data team, because I actually was, I think I was pretty good at it. And I really enjoy the sort of mentoring and helping the people on my team coordinate between the business and the data side. And I was good at that. And so I don't get to do as much of that. Although interestingly enough, and thankfully, Delivery Layer does give me a lot of that opportunity to kind of interface with the business in terms of how they're going to get value from their data, because that's kind of what Delivery Layer is all about. And so that has been good, but I definitely do miss parts of just working as a data person.
So I have a couple of questions then, and this will all tie back. One, how do you? I guess what are the ingredients of a well-run data team and a good data leader? And then the follow-on question is, which we'll get to in a second, but like now that you're interfacing with companies, do you feel like you've developed maybe a sense of whether or not the client has data needs you can help them with, and are you able to diagnose sort of the problems that you see with companies? And so maybe we'll go with the first question, which is a good data teams. What
Sure.
are the
All right.
ingredients?
So that's a big question, Joe.
Yeah.
So what makes good data teams? All right. So I've been on the side of the data leader asked to answer that question
Uh huh.
around, hey, we're spending a lot of money on our data teams. And how do we judge whether that is a good investment or a bad investment? And my my general approach, I've got two sides of this. So the first side is that I don't try to put a number on things. And I think at the point that someone's asking you to put a number on it, you've already lost the game, because you cannot put a number on a data team. And so doing it is just an exercise in futility, and you just have to be you, one of my most important things is, as a data person, you have to know what data is going to tell you and what data is not going to tell you, and certain things data is not going to tell you. So, but I do think about it as a flywheel a little bit, in that when a data team is doing a good job, you can tell, because the business leaders feel supported with data. You are using data to make good business decisions. That influences the data culture at the company. It brings an implicit push to build out better tools and infrastructure to support the business. And then that sort of flywheel gets going, to where when you're rocking and you've got teams that feel like they have the support that they need, you can generally tell. Versus when you've got teams that are not using data or not getting the support that they need, which are two very different things. You can also tell. You can tell when
Mm.
data teams are just trying to push things that people don't care about. You can tell when you've got data leaders or stakeholders trying to make up impact on things that aren't really driving in the business.
How do you know
Um,
those things though? How do you
what
how
do
do
you
you
mean?
how do you know when people are phoning it in? How do you know when people are making it up?
The data people or the business people?
Both really, but the data people. We'll start with the data people.
Oh, so okay. So I have a strong point of view on this, which is data is a support function, and you're like the sidekick, because data generally doesn't have specific business goals tied to data. So if you're helping marketing team, the marketing team has certain goals, and the marketing leader has a strategy for how to hit those goals. And part of that strategy should be that data is going to be like if they're the hero, data is the sidekick, helping them make decisions along the way that's going to get them to their goals. If that business leader is not pushing for data to be there and for data to do important things in that vision, then you failed as a data team.
Mm.
That's it. And if that data leader is saying, I could have more budget just to focus on, if that business leader is saying, hey, I have got a marketing budget of X amount of dollars. I'm going to take 100K of that and hire another analyst because that's going to get me better results towards my goals than having the extra money spent in marketing. Ultimately, that's what's happening. And then that's how you know if you really need it. It's because people are making sacrifices in order for the data team to be there. Um, and that's where if people are phoning it in or not doing a good job, the people who are on the business side, they know.
Mhm.
And they have other uses of that money if there's not any value being actually provided.
Interesting. So on LinkedIn, where we hang out a lot, there are some pundits out there who would I would say would argue with that position, right? And they would say that data should be leading the business, and we need to be data driven and so forth. What do you think about those comments?
I mean, I think they're wrong.
Okay.
um, I don't think they come from a bad place. And
Yeah.
I think that in some cases you have leaders who, for various reasons, want to ignore data to further their own narrative, which might not be accurate, right? Like if you're that shows them doing a better job than they actually are. You get those types of situations, and people definitely get burned in them.
Yeah.
So I don't want to diminish the fact that data has a governance role to play in addition to just being the sidekick of the individual business leaders, because I think that is important for data to play that role. That said, the data team, if you have a head of sales, if you hire for a chief revenue officer, that chief revenue officer is going to take data, but also take many years of judgment and experience and look at the data and come up with what a strategy is supposed to be for a domain where they are the expert that was
Right.
hired to do that. And I think it is overstepping for data leaders to come in and try to override a chief revenue officer on how the business should get revenue, or override a marketing leader on how the business should be marketing. And I've made this mistake in the past.
Mm.
Like I've gone head to head. So I don't want to pretend like I never have. I have made this mistake in the past, but I feel pretty strongly about this now, especially having been on the business side where I was actually on the hook for hitting numbers in a big company. Here's what I would say. If the data leader is not going to get fired for missing a marketing number, then they should not be the one that's deciding the strategy to hit a marketing number.
Mm.
And the marketing leader is going to get fired if they don't hit a marketing number, and that's why it has to be on them to make the decision.
So what do you think of roles like chief data officer?
I think they're great roles. I think they're
Yeah.
important, and I think it's like head of HR. HR is not responsible for hitting a sales number, but hiring is a key component of success for any function. And I think data is similar. I think data is important. It's important to have a senior data person like a chief data officer who can be a peer to the chief revenue officer, or the head of marketing, or the head of product, and be able to help them understand how data is going to be important and impactful in their life. And then ultimately the final decision is on them. I don't want to make it seem like it's not a partnership. I see
Right.
this as a partnership. It's just like in any partnership, in a corporate setting, there has to be someone who can make the final decision.
Right.
And 9 times out of 10, you'd probably make the same decision, but that 1 time out of 10, the sort of tie goes to the business leader.
Hmm. That's a good perspective. So bring it back to the second part of the question then. So now that you're a startup on the other side and you're working with companies, I guess how much does your experience play into assessing maybe the one, I guess, the maturity of um, a company's data practices, and two, like how much you can help them as a as a startup and a vendor.
Sure. So let me take a step for a second and
Yeah.
just explain a little bit about what delivery layer does, because I think that would be important
I guess
context
it would be,
before
yeah.
being
Should
able
have
to
asked that first.
answer
Yeah.
that question.
Yeah.
So delivery layer is a customer facing data platform. So if you think about it, most of the tools in the world of data are built to support internal analysis use cases, and they kind of fall apart when your data needs to get outside your company, because there are a lot of assumptions that go into permissions, trust, security that on for internal teams are different than for external teams, or even sort of form factor, right? So if you think about a delivery layer as kind of a mashup of a BI tool and a web platform and an API platform with a whole bunch of permissions. So it's kind of like a front end product. So someone goes to a website, they log in, it's delivery layer, but with your brand colors, your everything, your website, and then they navigate a website where they're getting access to data, but it's only permission data that you're only able to go to the pages that you have permission to. You're only able to see the data that you have permission to. It's sort of like a replacement for a front end on top of data.
Hmm.
Obviously coming from Nielsen, right? Thinking about a company like Nielsen, Nielsen's value is in their data, and then they have various web applications and APIs that have been built over 20 years, some of which are better than others. And the thesis that I'm going after is that um, that layer, the web applications that people are using to access data, is sort of undifferentiated. No one's trying to come up with a new version of a line chart that's different than everyone else's version of a line chart. It's the data that's valuable. And so that's what delivery layer offers out of the box. You've got sort of this customer facing data product, as opposed to needing to hire a development team to build a platform. And then on the other side, the category of embedded BI, I find just by definition treats external use cases as like a second class citizen. I mean, it's just very, even from the name of the industry, it's a BI tool, and then you're sort of just adding on embedding into it, but it hasn't been purpose built for external use cases. And so it falls apart at scale. So that's delivery layer.
Yeah.
And so when I go to companies, there's pretty much always revenue on the line. So they are thinking about, I want to launch some sort of market intelligence product, or I've got data and I need to offer a front end to my customers. And so I see all stages of sort of data maturity, but in general, most of the people that I'm talking to are a little bit towards the higher end of maturity, because they already have data that they need to sell. And so they're thinking about a platform like Delivery Layer for it. But if they don't have data that is ready to sell, then they're probably not talking to me.
Hmm.
That said, I've seen everything under the sun, and I think that coming from the outside versus what I've seen internal data teams be focused on, I do think there's a lot of opportunity for data teams to just essentially have a broader mandate around driving revenue that I don't see oftentimes happening as much as I think it should.
What would that look like?
So I think it's a couple of things. I think number one is that there are some things that you can only see by being close to the data.
Hmm.
And so there are categories of maybe products, but also internal things that your company can do that if you don't independently have a point of view when you're looking at your data and then come to people in your company to answer, they're never going to independently think of, because they're just never going to see that data.
Right.
And I think that data people oftentimes don't feel empowered to take that type of agency within their companies, and I think that they should, because it's actually something that everybody is kind of waiting for, and oftentimes they're just waiting forever. It never happens.
That's really interesting. So if I think about it from the perspective of being a sidekick, right? So what you're saying is a sidekick isn't empowered enough to be like the best sidekick they can be.
Yes.
Okay.
Or rather, they don't see themselves. They see themselves in a narrow view of what the job of a sidekick is, right? So imagine the sidekick. Imagine data is essentially giving your business a map, right? And so the sidekick is helping the hero, map between where they are and where the villain is, right? But there could be other things that the sidekick does. That's not the only thing the sidekick could do. The sidekick could be in there with, setting traps for the villains, whatever. I'm not going to go too deep into this
Hey, you live in
analogy.
Gotham
But
City, so
that's true. That's true. Um, but literally you could go in with anything. Like, you can see that in your data, you're noticing a certain segment of customers, or you're noticing a certain type of pattern in your data where certain people are buying more, right? You could independently just do an analysis on that, come to some sort of conclusion on the marketing side to say, hey, it looks like we've got 5% of our customers who are driving 20% of our revenue, and they seem to have these things in common. What would it look like to go and build product features and spin up some marketing efforts to target this segment very explicitly? And you might be the only person in your company that is close enough to the data to be able to come up with those
right.
types of ideas. And I think that oftentimes data people will get a lot of questions from their business stakeholders and then answer those questions and focus on those priorities. But I think it's those type of ideas that come from just looking at the data and having a reasonable mental model of the business, that you can go in and you can suggest things, and the opportunity is just there, and a lot of people don't take advantage of it.
Well, yeah, I think you had a LinkedIn post this morning, something like data people won't ever be bored or something like that, because for every question there's five more or something like that. So I don't know if bored is the right word, but you get the idea. So yeah, that's interesting. But back to delivery layer. I mean, so you're kind of changing the way that you're providing analytics to and customers, right? So, and this is something I know with Ternary, we were working with countless vendors, really, right? And I think everyone's trying to push the embedded analytics thing. And I know from implementing this stuff, it's hit and miss. It's reasonably okay, I suppose, if you want charts on a website, um, but that's about it. I mean, uh, I suppose, like, what's your differentiator then? Why are you better than
Yeah,
that?
it's a great question. And I will say it is a crowded market
Yeah.
in terms of BI tools and data tools. So to me, it's kind of like the difference between a wildlife photographer and a wedding photographer. And they use the same camera and the same lenses. And from my perspective, the industry of external facing data has needed wedding photographers, and what they get are wildlife photographers.
Mm,
And because it's not just the camera, and this is part of the challenge, actually, of what I face on the marketing side for Delivery Layer, because the whole world is talking about cameras and the camera feature. And so it's like, I hire a
yeah.
photographer because they've got this camera. And it's what I'm trying to do is to try to shift it to say, yes, a camera is certainly a part of it. And you need to have a picture at the end of it. That's definitely part of it. But there are also really important things around that camera, such as how do you get the families together, and how do you
Mm,
organize, how do you know all of the different wedding shots that you need, and how do you make sure to, like, stage the different things and go along with the ceremony and be a part of it. But like, there's so much stuff around just the camera. And that's how I feel about, as you said, the sort of embedded use cases. But really, to me, again, even the word embedded implies like a second class citizen in terms of a use case. It's not a real focus. I mean, if you asked people, how far down for was the embedding functionality in terms of focus for traditional BI tools, they would answer that it's pretty far down. It's focus number 20, right? And
Yeah. Oh, go on.
and so that's how I try to think about delivery layer versus the other tools. Where yes, everybody is going to have a camera, right? Everybody is going to have a chart and a data table, and they're going to connect to your data warehouse and run queries. But it's the stuff around that where I'm trying to compete.
Yeah, and I think to use your analogy too with the wildlife and wedding photographer, right? So, say you're at a wedding, right? I mean, the the way that embedded analytics are, I guess, embedded into an application, well, that usually relies on software engineers to get that done. So it's like having your caterer also take the photos um, at the wedding, right? So, and the software engineers typically don't understand data. They really don't care. This is just a ticket they have to get off their sprint that they somehow agreed to do. Um, and so, yeah, it feels like it's a very kludgy process for everybody involved. Like the vendor, again, they phone it in with the whatever embedded feature they have. Like I've worked with a lot of BI vendors. You have too. This isn't something that they're super stoked on. It's like, here's a knife frame, put it in a page, right? The dev's like, okay. I've also seen devs get the chart wrong sometimes. They're just like, oh, it ends up being like a pie chart or something, and it wasn't supposed to be that. It's supposed to be like a line chart. Um, so yeah, that's a caterer. He's just like, I don't know. Like I take pictures with your camera. They look like crap, but that's not my deal. So yeah, it's yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's an interesting insight though, right? 'Cause I feel like most people would just tolerate the world as it is and say, well, it's probably good enough. I mean, why was it such a burning thing in your mind that you set out on your own to start a company around this?
Yeah, I mean, clearly this was sort of I've worked for a lot of companies where data was key to the product.
Yeah.
And so for for my use cases, these types of tools were never enough. And so I I was building products with dev teams. So instead of trying to hack a use case to a BI tool that would never really fit.
Hmm.
Um, so that's where I felt a lot of the pain because as a data person, what it is not easy to be a data person, as you and everybody listening to this knows. And there are so many challenges in getting to a valuable data set that go between when you have an idea and when that data set is ready. And that's hard. What shouldn't be hard is just having a platform for your customers to log in and see that data. That should be really easy. And like as you said, it's a kludgy process. Embedded BI has a fundamental question attached to it also, which is embedded into what,
Mhm.
right? Like it assumes that you have an engineering team who's going to manage an application that's going to keep it up, that's going to do the DevOps for it, the load balancing, that's going to cache result. Like there's a lot even that goes into what embedded BI is embedded into. And that's where I think a platform that's built specifically for this use
Mhm.
case has an opportunity. Again, I'm super early, so we're gonna see how the future plays out. And I recognize this is a smaller like my my focus is on a narrow use case. And so the hope is that because I solve inside this very narrow category so much better than a generic BI tool is going to,
Yeah.
then I'm going to be able to win. But the challenge is on the marketing side is getting people to identify that they're in that small category and not immediately jump to either custom software or to some sort of embedded BI tool.
Right. That could be the danger too. Positioning is absolutely critical, as you point out. Yeah, I could see that because ultimately either they're going to compare you to like the big BI company. So like, well, why don't I just use Tableau? Like, why am I going to use Solomon's tiny startup for this? No, that's absolutely right. And the thing is, the data space is super crowded with vendors. I mean, I know personally, I'm asked, get a lot of requests. Hey, can you help can you just give our posts on LinkedIn like a like or something? And normally I'm just like, no, or maybe if I'm friends with them, then sure, why not? But like, everyone's scrambling for attention these days. It's a huge problem. I think the biggest problem. I was talking with another friend of mine who has another data startup, but he built a wonderful product. Then he said, yeah, it's surprising you build it and people just don't show up and start knocking on your door to use it. Right.
Yeah.
He learned the hard fact that distribution and marketing is a massive component to success. It's I don't even feel dirty saying it. It's just the reality of it. So
Yeah. I I think that that's normal. I mean, what they say is that when startups go against big companies, the question is, are the startups going to figure out distribution first, or will the big companies figure out innovation first? And that's the race to see who's going to win. And that's the reality of business. I do think that I do think that it's wrong to expect that the data industry is going to be small enough for anyone to know all the players. I wrote a post on this sometime where it's like there are 55,000 roofing companies in the
I
US.
remember this one. Yeah.
and what, there are 2,000
I think it was 85,000,
companies?
wasn't it? Anyway,
Something,
it was a lot.
It's many more than any even world-class expert in the roofing industry would be able to know about.
Right.
And I think that there are a lot of opportunities still in the data space. I don't think I think the big categories will be dominated by, and I guess the question is, what kind of industry are we going to be? Are we going to be an industry like the automotive industry, where sure, there are 50 car companies, but you kind of know all of them, or 20 major car companies and you know all of them? Or are we going to be more distributed? I think we're going to be more distributed, because I think that data is going to be integrated into a lot of these tools, where it's tough to say this is a data company versus, Gong is a sales and conversational intelligence tool, but they're only enabled because of their very sophisticated data science efforts. They're essentially a data company, but they're just marketed to a very specific niche problem. I think there are going to be a lot more of those, because right now everybody's fighting to try to be the generic everything for everybody. Everybody's trying to be Tableau, right? I don't think there are as many companies that are getting very niche into specific industries to say, we're just going to be this for this type of industry. I talked to a guy recently who's like focusing on a data product for franchise companies.
That's cool.
And it's like, you know what? In that market, you're going to be able to do things that other companies aren't because of your narrow focus. So I think there are going to be a lot of those companies.
Oh yeah, a friend of mine, he had a data company, analytics company, focused on quick serve restaurants. Kill it, right? And again, it kind of goes back to category design too. If you're familiar with that, so just own a niche, create a niche, and then own that, then you're the top player all of a sudden, right? So I think that's definitely one approach. I think it's interesting. I think the number of companies is really it goes in a pendulum for sure. I think we went to the extreme in terms of like a lot of companies were maybe features arguably, and with just the looming cull of a lot of companies due to the just running out of runway, like that'll naturally shrink. They'll get bought or go out of business, or something will happen, and then we'll be back. And I think in the short term you'll see more consolidation. That's a pretty, I think, an obvious one. But at the same time, there's always this undercurrent of next gen companies out there that are, like yourself, who just see a new opportunity and are going to do it. Because I don't think anyone's accepting of the status quo of, the big dominant players are going to continually, permanently, dominate. I mean, the nature of the tech industry is such that there's always a sea change happening, right? And so, but I stopped counting. Actually, I gave up trying to keep track of all the companies out there. It's like if you're the roofing industry analyst, you just be like, yeah, I stopped counting at like number 1,000. I don't know about you, but every day I get messages from random companies like, hey, check out what we're doing. I'm like, that's really interesting. That's sometimes it's cool, but a lot of times they're trying to go after big incumbents, right? So a lot of data integration companies get a ton of messages from people saying, yeah, we can connect your data from sources to destinations. I'm like, that's been done like a million times already. Like, what's your unique take on this? So it's
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and I think that the VC environment is going to make it so that a lot of the companies that raised money at high valuations that never built enough of a business to get it to the next round in this new environment are gonna have real problems. And I actually think that that might cause some sort of ripples throughout the data world because I think there's going to be a little bit of a flight to quality.
mm,
That said, let's see let's see how it plays out.
no,
But
we will.
it's all like I know a couple people that had tools that went under like we're using tools that went under, and they've got a couple of days to migrate to something new for business critical
Yeah.
processes. It gets
Well,
tricky.
yeah, that
So
happened. That happened at a company I was at. The company's like, yeah, we're going out of business. Like, cool. What do you guys have? Any relief for the customers that have been paying you good money for this? And not really. It's like, cool. All right. Well,
yeah,
kindly go fuck yourself, and we'll go figure this out. So it's just kind of how it is. That's how it is, man. So, but I think it's a good opportunity too if you have the capability of just making like the best in class product, like kind of what you're focusing on. Then I don't, over time, especially if you can get past that hump of obscurity and get a lot of good traction. I mean that's a killer place to be. So that's a category you own.
that's
Until everybody decides like, hey, they're into some cool stuff. Let's get into that too. Then then you're the leader.
You
And
know what? At the point that everybody decides that they need a tool like Delivery Layer, I think that I will be okay. One of the cool
yeah,
things about starting a company, especially in the B2B space, is you see how big the world is.
uh-huh.
I mean, there are big multi-billion-dollar data companies that I hadn't even heard of, and I've been a data leader for a long
Mm.
time. And just getting into getting exposed to how big the world of data is has been one of the most interesting and coolest parts about the journey for me. And I think the world is big enough for a lot of different companies focusing in similar areas.
When did you start noticing that the world was bigger than you thought?
When I started trying to prospect,
Mm.
and I was trying to think about, well, what kind of companies could I be talking to? And it was like, oh, agencies are doing client reporting, and they're like spinning up the same report on 20 instances of Tableau, one for
Mm.
each customer, and then they struggle to scale out their reporting, right? And it's like, okay, so what does the agency world look like? And it's like huge. And then there's agencies that are owned by other agencies, and then the agencies like, and when one agency brings in a new tool, the other agencies all look at it to see, oh, are they going to get an edge over me within the same holding company? It's such an interesting dynamic in the world. So there's consulting companies, right? If you think about it, a consulting engagement is essentially the world's smallest data product. So it's like, okay, imagine a $2 million brand tracking deal for Coca-Cola that could be a $2.5 million deal if there was like an application on the front end.
Mhm.
So because then you could give it to executives and they could just have something that they use as a leave behind. And then you can scale that as a product where, okay, you've got Coke, but Pepsi and Nestle and Unilever and all these other companies might want to buy the same thing.
Yeah.
So then it's like, okay, how big is the consulting world? It's
Oh, it's
huge.
massive.
There's like countless consulting firms that do specialty projects, vertical focused, management consulting focused. So you just once you get access to one of these like B2B databases and you realize how big things are, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. On the agency note too, like we've worked with a lot of agencies through our work with Ternary, and I do empathize with your note there. Like I think that would be an interesting niche just in and of itself, because every agency have to have it spin up. And we have one client that would be a perfect candidate for delivery layer. Actually, it's now that I think about it, it's like they they're in the hospitality space, right? And so they have thousands of clients. These thousands of clients are hospitality companies that rely on the analytics and the services of our client, and they had to spin up thousands of reports. And here's what got nuts: is one of the big BI vendors, right? They said, "Oh, you want embedded? That's cool. So we're going to charge you a license for every single one of your customers. Yeah, it's 60 grand a pop."
Yep.
Yeah, and like, no thanks. We'll
Yeah.
figure this out. So
It's I mean the those models are built again for internal analysis
yeah,
purposes. The business models are for internal analysis. Nobody understands what it's like to sit on the other side where you need some budget that you're going to be able to allocate for a certain type of end result. You can't like I've done this. I've had to order new licenses from Salesforce for different Tableau users. It could take them a week or two sometimes before I get the licenses that I need. Like I can't do that if I'm selling to a customer. I'm not just able to wait a couple weeks before the licenses get added on to the MSA with my enterprise sales rep who's on vacation for the next week and
right.
will get back to me when they're ready. It's like it's not like I said, it's just not built for external facing use
It feels a lot
cases.
like a bank. It feels like a bank or something, right? Like
I mean,
it's like, oh, they
it's
open 9 to 5. It's fine. Yeah, it's crazy. No, I mean, good on you. I think it's uh, for me, it's a pain I tolerated, and I'm just like, I don't know. I got other things to think about. I mean, it's really cool that you saw this problem, and I guess was passionate enough about it to put your money where your mouth is too, and go and solve it. Right? Like that's super cool.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the thing that I always knew, like back when Harlan Harris and he had a couple other authors wrote that paper analyzing the analyzers way back in the day about like what kind of data person are you going to be. I always knew from the beginning that I was going to be like a data business person.
Mm,
That was going to be my thing. And my whole career, I've really been focused on how do we actually drive business real dollars value from data. And I think we're at a little bit of an inflection point where there's been a lot of investment and some people have won and some people have definitely not won and like gotten an ROI on that investment. And to me, I think for the future of the data industry, it's important wherever we can to like show how we can drive revenue. And so for me, delivery layer is like super important, even just in general for the data industry. It's because delivery layer happens to focus very specifically on that type of data that drives revenue because it's a product. But I think it's really important for all data people to showcase how you can really make money off of your data
yeah,
because we've got a brand issue problem as an industry. And the more anyone does anywhere to really showcase how you can make real money and drive real success, the more it helps everybody everywhere, and vice versa.
yeah. Powerful words. So awesome. Well, Saul, it's been a great chatting with you. I guess I hope to be on your podcast soon. You got a new one it's coming out soon, so be a lot of
There you
fun.
go.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
be a lot of fun. For people who want to learn more about you and delivery layer, how can they do that?
sure. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Solomon Kahn, and I write posts every day. And then you can check out Delivery Layer at deliverylayer.com.
Ooh, all right, I'll put that in the show notes. All right, Solomon, it's great chatting with you. We'll see you back on LinkedIn. So, all
All
right,
right,
take
Joe.
care.
See you
Yeah.
soon. Bye.